Every year, without fail, she visited her brother's grave. Rain or shine, she sat alone among the fresh flowers and fading memories, clutching the worn photo of him in his uniform. Her grief was quiet, but deep. Her brother had been more than family. He was a hero, a protector, and a friend to many. Yet in all those years, no one from his unit had come to honor him. Until one day, a solitary figure in full dress uniform appeared, followed by another and another. The unit that had once stood shoulder to shoulder with her brother was returning, not just to pay respects, but to remind her that she was not alone. She made the journey every year without fail. The road to the cemetery was quiet, winding past fields that shimmered gold in late summer, or were muffled in white under winter's snow. Sometimes, when she was driving alone, she'd find her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, the hum of the engine mingling with the thoughts that would not leave her mind. The car radio might play softly, but most times she'd turn it off, preferring silence. She had to be ready to face the grave, to face the memories, to face herself. The cemetery itself was small, nestled just beyond the outskirts of town, where the trees grew thick and the breeze whispered secrets through the leaves. She knew every crack in the pavement, every twisted root that pushed against the walkways, every weather-worn bench and rusted iron gate. The place held a strange kind of stillness, a quiet sanctuary where the past met the present in shadows and light, and at its heart was the grave that held her brother's name. She always arrived early, as if the timing mattered. Not to anyone else, but to her. The morning sun filtered through the branches, casting soft patterns on the ground. Dew clung to the grass, glistening like tiny jewels before evaporating with the warmth. The scent of damp earth rose up to meet her as she stepped out of the car, carrying the carefully chosen flowers wrapped in tissue paper, a ritual as sacred as the visit itself. Lilies, white and pure, for innocence lost. Forget-me-nots, small and blue, for remembrance. She never spoke of these moments to anyone else. There was no one who understood the weight they carried. Friends had stopped asking long ago. There was only so much sorrow a person could witness before retreating into their own lives. Family gatherings had become sparse, strained by the uncomfortable silence surrounding her grief. Yet she didn't come here for company. She came for him. Her fingers trembled as she placed the flowers beside the headstone. A heavy slab of granite etched with his name and the dates that felt like wounds. His birth, so full of promise, his death so cruelly abrupt. She traced the letters with a reverence that felt like a prayer. Time had weathered the stone just slightly, but the memory it held remained sharp and vivid. The grave was her anchor, a place where she could hold on to something solid in a world that often felt fleeting and fragile. The years stretched behind her like an endless road, each anniversary folding into the next. She remembered the first visit after his funeral, a blur of tears and stunned disbelief. She'd knelt there for hours, unwilling to leave, whispering his name over and over, as if saying it might bring him back. But he was gone, carried away by a war that promised honor but delivered pain. Her brother had been so full of life. She remembered the boy he was, reckless and kind, always ready to stand up for those who couldn't. Their childhood was a tapestry of laughter and scraped knees, of secrets shared under starlit skies and fierce arguments over trivial things. He was her protector, the one who taught her how to ride a bike, how to face the world with courage. When he left for the military, she had felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride in his sense of duty, fear for the dangers he might face. The day he left was etched in her memory like a photograph. He stood tall in his uniform, the weight of the heavy jacket and boots unfamiliar on his slender frame. His smile was brave, but his eyes betrayed the uncertainty he tried to hide. They had hugged tightly, the kind of embrace that spoke of promises made and prayers whispered. She had watched him walk away, disappearing down the road, carrying with him a piece of her heart. And then the war came. Letters at first, full of hope and camaraderie, stories of training and distant lands. His voice, though written on paper, was alive with energy. But as time went on, the letters grew scarcer. The news that followed was harder to bear. Reports of skirmishes, of friends lost, of the harsh realities of combat. Her nights became restless, haunted by nightmares of explosions and silence. When the call came, it was early morning. The phone ringing shattered the fragile calm of her home. The voice on the other end was formal, distant, delivering words that crushed her world. Her knees buckled as she sank to the floor, clutching the receiver like a lifeline. The tears came, unbidden and endless. The brother who had been her anchor was gone, taken by the war she had hoped would spare him. The funeral was a procession of sorrow. She remembered the sea of uniforms, the folded flag, the salute that felt both proud and unbearably final. But what she could not forget was the absence of his unit. No faces she recognized among the mourners, no comrades standing beside her in grief, only their family, standing small and broken against the vastness of loss. For years after, she wondered why. Why had the men and women who fought alongside him stayed away? She had no answers, only silence. The loneliness deepened, settling into the spaces where hope once lived. The cemetery became her refuge, the grave her companion. She would sit there for hours sometimes, watching the sky shift from dawn's soft pinks to midday's harsh light. Then the quiet descent of dusk. She spoke to him in whispers, telling him about her life, the small triumphs and the crushing defeats. She told him about the world that moved on without him, about the people who had come and gone, about the dreams that had died with him. Sometimes she imagined his laughter breaking through the stillness, a sound so clear it made her smile through tears. Other times, the silence was profound, so deep it pressed against her chest like a weight, reminding her of all that was lost. The years passed, and with each visit, her sorrow was both a wound and a testament. She carried him with her, in her thoughts, in her heart, in every breath she took. The grief never fully left, but neither did the love. It was a quiet presence, a thread woven through the fabric of her life. She sat alone, but she was not empty. She was filled with memories, with stories, with an unbreakable bond that death could not sever. This was her vigil, her promise, her way of keeping him alive. And so, every year she returned, alone, steadfast, unyielding, because some love is too deep to ever let go. It was the 10th anniversary of her brother's death when it happened. The first unexpected visitor at the grave that had known only her footsteps for years. She arrived as she always did, carrying the familiar bundle of flowers wrapped carefully in tissue, her heart heavy but steady. The cemetery was still cloaked in early morning mist, the air crisp and quiet. As she made her way toward the headstone, she noticed a figure standing nearby, rigid and still, dressed in full military dress uniform. The polished boots, the perfectly pressed jacket, the medals glinting faintly in the muted light. It was a sight both jarring and profoundly moving. Her breath caught in her throat. She paused, unsure if she should speak or retreat. For years she had sat alone, the silence around the grave as constant as the seasons. This presence was something new, unexpected, and fragile. The man did not move at first. He simply stood there, head bowed, hands folded in front of him. It was as if he was waiting for permission to break the quiet that had settled like a shroud over the place. Finally, he lifted his head, and their eyes met. There was something familiar in his gaze, an echo of the brother she remembered, a reflection of the loyalty she had longed to see. He stepped closer, carefully, respectfully, the crunch of his polished shoes on the gravel loud in the stillness. "I'm Sergeant Miller," he said quietly. "I served with your brother. I wanted to come, to pay my respects." Her throat tightened, words caught in her chest, tangled in grief and disbelief. She wanted to ask why no one had come before, but the question seemed too heavy to voice. Instead, she nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the lilies beside the stone. The sergeant stood with her in silence, a companion in sorrow who had finally crossed the distance. He spoke then, his voice low but steady, telling her about the unit, about the men and women who had fought alongside her brother, who had shared the dangers and the bonds forged only in war. He explained the hesitation, the unwritten rules of military brotherhood that had kept them away from the public eye, the personal grief that made approaching family difficult. They were bound by loyalty, but also by pain, and for years they had grieved in their own way, alone, scattered, unable to reach out. She listened, absorbing every word, every fragment of a life she had only glimpsed through letters and memories. He spoke of her brother's courage in battle, his kindness to new recruits, his quiet strength that inspired those around him. She pictured him again, not just as her brother, but as a soldier, a friend, a part of something larger than herself. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thread woven from the presence of another who remembered him, who carried his memory forward. The sergeant promised that others from the unit wanted to come, to stand together, to honor not just her brother, but all those who had served and sacrificed. As the morning sun rose higher, warming the stone and the earth, she realized that this was more than a visit. It was a beginning, a bridge from isolation to connection, from silence to shared remembrance. For years she had sat alone at the grave, but now, for the first time, she was not alone. The unit was coming back, and with them came healing. After Sergeant Miller's visit, the change was slow but undeniable. Word traveled quietly through the unit, carried in private conversations and messages shared with a cautious hope. One by one, the men and women who had fought beside her brother began making plans to return, not out of obligation, but out of something far more profound, a need to honor their fallen comrade and to reclaim a piece of their own healing. The first to arrive after Miller was Corporal Hayes, a lanky man with a haunted look in his eyes, the kind of look born from too many nights spent under foreign skies, too many friends lost in moments that still lingered like shadows. He approached the grave with a slow, deliberate step, his polished dress uniform reflecting the afternoon sun. His hands shook slightly as he laid a folded flag next to the flowers, the symbol of respect and farewell he had carried with him for years, but had never known where to place until now. She watched them arrive one after another, faces etched with years of service and sacrifice, eyes shadowed by memories that no one outside their circle could understand. There was Lieutenant Ramirez, whose calm demeanor masked the fierce loyalty that had kept the unit together in the darkest hours. Private First Class Thompson, whose laughter had once been a balm during tense moments, now quiet but resolute as he stood shoulder to shoulder with strangers united by loss. Each step toward the grave was a small act of courage, a silent admission that grief was not theirs to bear alone. They wore their uniforms with pride, the medals and ribbons telling stories of valor and hardship. But there was more in their presence than ceremony. It was a declaration, a statement that they had not forgotten him, that they carried his memory in their hearts as fiercely as the battles they had fought. They shared glances and nods, unspoken words passing between them, as if rebuilding a brotherhood fractured by time and distance. As they gathered around the grave, stories began to spill quietly into the open air. Memories of late-night watches, shared meals in dusty outposts, and the small acts of kindness that had kept them going. They spoke of his quiet bravery, how he had shielded a comrade during an ambush, how he never left a man behind. These were not just tales of war, they were pieces of a man she thought she knew but was only beginning to truly understand. She listened, sometimes smiling through tears, sometimes nodding as if these stories were the missing pieces of a puzzle she had been trying to solve for years. The unit's presence transformed the sterile, lonely cemetery into a living memorial, not just of her brother, but of all the lives intertwined with his. There was a sense of something healing in the air, fragile but real, as if the act of gathering was stitching together wounds that had long festered in silence. They stayed long after the last flower was laid, standing in respectful silence as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the grass. The sound of their voices had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of nature and the steady beating of hearts that had found solace in unity. For the first time since the war took her brother from her, she felt a weight lifting, a burden shared and eased by those who had carried it alongside him. The unit's return was not just a visit, it was a reclamation of memory, a tribute forged in loyalty and love. They had come back one by one, to stand where he had fallen, to honor a brother in arms, and to remind her that she was not alone. And as they dispersed into the fading light, promises were made, promises to return, to remember, and to carry his legacy forward together. Years of quiet grief had shaped her into someone who believed pain was meant to be borne alone. But as the unit gathered again and again, something began to shift. Their presence was more than a formality. It was a lifeline, a connection that reached beyond the sterile coldness of the graveyard and into the tangled, raw territory of healing. The soldiers didn't come to perform a ritual and leave. They came bearing stories, emotions, and scars that mirrored her own. And in that shared space, wounds began to open and slowly to heal. The gatherings evolved. What started as small groups standing silently by the grave grew into informal meetings beneath the old oaks. They spoke of the brother she had lost, but also of themselves, their fears, regrets, and the nights haunted by memories of war. Each story peeled back layers of pain they'd hidden away for years, bound by duty to appear strong but fragile beneath the surface. She listened, offering no empty comfort but her presence, solid and steady, allowing them the freedom to speak the truths no one else would hear. They spoke of the moments her brother had saved a life, of the laughter shared in the face of danger, and of the guilt they carried for surviving when he did not. The soldiers confessed to nights of nightmares and mornings of numbness, the burden of losing a brother who was also a friend and protector. Their shared grief formed a bond with her, one that transcended words. Together, they acknowledged that healing wasn't forgetting, but learning to live with loss without being crushed by it. She found herself opening up in ways she hadn't imagined possible. The silence that once wrapped around her like a shield began to crack, allowing grief and hope to coexist. She spoke of the little things, their childhood games, the quiet moments before he left, the ache of not having answers. The unit responded with their memories, filling the gaps she hadn't known were there. In those moments, the weight of loneliness lifted, replaced by a sense of belonging she had long thought lost. Their visits became a ritual of healing, a testament to the enduring power of brotherhood and family forged in the crucible of shared experience. Each meeting was a step toward reclaiming a future that once seemed impossible, one where memory and love could coexist with pain. Together, they planted small saplings near the grave, symbols of growth amid sorrow, of life continuing despite loss. She realized that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but honoring it, living with the pain while finding strength in connection. The unit's presence was a reminder that grief was not a solitary burden. It was shared, carried by many, and lightened by the bonds forged in blood and loyalty. Through their companionship, she discovered a resilience she hadn't known she possessed, and a community bound by love and remembrance. What had once been a solitary vigil transformed into a collective act of remembrance and hope. And in that transformation, she found the courage to face the future, not alone, but with the unit who had returned, steadfast and true. The day the unit arrived in full dress was unlike any she had experienced before. It was early morning, but the sky was already bright, the sunlight spilling through the branches of the ancient oaks surrounding the cemetery. One by one, they came. Dozens of soldiers, each carrying the weight of years spent apart, yet bound by the invisible thread of shared history and grief. Their uniforms gleamed, medals reflecting the sunlight like stars, their faces solemn but proud. The sound of their footsteps on the gravel was steady, a quiet drumbeat that echoed through the stillness, announcing their presence not just as visitors, but as a family reclaiming what had been lost. She stood at the edge of the grave, unable to move at first, overwhelmed by the sheer number of them. The loneliness that had defined her visits for so long was shattered in that moment, replaced by a swell of emotion she could barely contain. Her heart pounded, not just from the surprise, but from the recognition that these were the men and women who had shared her brother's last moments, who had carried his memory through the darkest nights, who had come back to honor him as they had promised. They formed a formation, silent and respectful, around the grave. Their leader stepped forward, a captain with steady eyes and a voice that carried the weight of command and compassion. He spoke softly but clearly, his words weaving a tapestry of remembrance that filled the space between the trees. He recounted her brother's acts of bravery, the moments of quiet kindness that had defined his character, the sacrifices made not just in battle, but in the bonds forged between soldiers. Each word was a stitch in the fabric of a story that had waited too long to be told aloud. As the captain finished, another soldier stepped forward, carrying the folded flag that had once draped her brother's coffin. With practiced hands, he presented it to her, an emblem of honor and loss, a tangible connection to the man she loved and mourned. She took the flag, her fingers trembling, tears spilling freely now, the grief and pride mingling in a flood she had kept bottled for years. Then came the salutes, the careful, precise movements learned through years of discipline and respect. The sound of rifles firing a 3-volley salute pierced the morning air, solemn and haunting. The echoes seemed to carry her brother's name, to lift it up beyond the earth and into the sky. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, feeling the presence of those who had fought beside him, those who had not forgotten. After the ceremony, the soldiers lingered, not out of duty, but out of a shared need to connect, to be together in that sacred space. They exchanged stories, laughter breaking through the sorrow, memories unfolding like petals revealing their full bloom. They spoke of the brother she had known and the soldier she was just beginning to understand. They shared the pain of loss and the hope of remembrance, the quiet comfort of knowing they were not alone. She felt herself becoming part of their story, no longer just a sister in mourning, but a member of a family forged in fire and remembrance. The unit's full dress presence was more than a ceremony. It was a reclaiming of history, a healing of wounds, and a promise that her brother's legacy would live on, not just in memory, but in the lives of those who had known and loved him. As the day wore on and the sun dipped lower, the soldiers began to depart, one by one, with quiet nods and final salutes. She watched them go, her heart full. The loneliness that had shadowed her for so long finally lifted. The grave was no longer a place of solitude, but a beacon of community and connection. She knew that this was only the beginning. The unit's return in full dress was a powerful reminder that love and loyalty transcend time and distance, that grief shared becomes strength, and that the ties forged in life do not end with death. Together, they would carry forward the memory of her brother, honoring him every year until their own time came. In that moment, standing amidst the soldiers who had come home, she felt peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Hope. Absolutely. Here's a detailed 1,000-word plot twist woven into the story's existing emotional and narrative fabric. This twist adds complexity and depth without detracting from the heartfelt core of the story. For years, she had believed her brother's death was a simple, tragic casualty of war, a brave soldier who fell in battle, honored by a handful of comrades and mourned by his family in quiet solitude. The truth, she would come to learn, was far more complicated. It began on the morning after the unit's large, solemn gathering at the grave. She woke to a knock on her door that carried the weight of something urgent. Standing there was a man she didn't recognize, a middle-aged officer in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of military experience. He introduced himself as Major Collins, an intelligence officer who had served in the same theater as her brother but in a different capacity, one that rarely intersected with frontline soldiers. His eyes were sharp, cautious, but there was a hint of sympathy beneath the professional demeanor. "I need to speak with you about your brother," he said without preamble. Her heart clenched, expecting something painful but straightforward. Instead, what followed unraveled everything she thought she knew. Major Collins explained that her brother had been involved in a covert operation, a mission so sensitive that even most members of his unit were unaware of its full scope. The official story of his death, the one that had brought her years of grief and the quiet visits to the grave, was only part of the truth. In reality, he had been engaged in gathering intelligence critical to national security, operating behind enemy lines in conditions far more dangerous than anyone had realized. But that was only the beginning. The Major revealed that shortly before his death, her brother had uncovered information about a betrayal within their own ranks. Someone high up, someone trusted, who had been leaking secrets to the enemy. This discovery had put him in grave danger. His unit had been kept in the dark to protect the operation and prevent leaks. The reason no one had come forward sooner was because they had been ordered to stay silent, to protect lives and an ongoing investigation. As she listened, the weight of silence that had stretched over the years transformed into a cage. The men who had returned to honor her brother had not been shirking their respect or love for him. They had been bound by orders, by secrecy, by fear. Their silence had been an unspoken oath to protect a mission bigger than themselves. The Major handed her a folder, worn and heavy with classified stamps. Inside were declassified documents, mission reports, and a photograph she hadn't seen before. Her brother, smiling faintly, holding a small device in his hand, a symbol of the intelligence he had risked everything to protect. The twist shattered her understanding but gave her new purpose. Her brother had not died in a simple firefight. He had died because he stood for something greater: truth, loyalty, justice. And the betrayal he uncovered was still an open wound in the military community. She realized that the unit's return, their silence, their cautious visits, had been more than acts of mourning. They had been acts of protection, protecting his name, his sacrifice, and the fragile secrets that could still threaten lives if exposed too soon. This revelation ignited a fire within her. No longer content to simply grieve, she resolved to uncover the full truth, to seek justice not only for her brother's death, but for the betrayal that had fractured the very ideals he had fought to uphold. The plot twist transformed the story from one of solitary mourning and remembrance into a journey of uncovering hidden truths, confronting painful betrayals, and honoring a legacy that was far more complex and heroic than anyone had known.